The horizon did not exist. There was only the collision of gray sky and black, churning water. Moses stood where the land ended, his boots sinking into the saturated, shifting sand. Each wave that slammed into the shoreline sent a spray of freezing brine across his face, stinging his skin and blurring his vision. He reached out, his hand hovering over the roiling surf, but pulled back as a wall of foam surged forward, nearly reclaiming the ground beneath his feet. The ocean was not merely water. It was a rhythmic, violent pulse that seemed to taunt the very concept of a path forward. He took a heavy step toward the water's edge, but the tide roared with such intensity that the ground trembled. He stopped. He dug his heels into the muck to anchor himself against the gale that whipped off the surface. There was no way through. The sea was an impenetrable barrier, a chaotic expanse that defied every instinct to advance. He stood perfectly still, a single vertical line against the horizontal fury of the deep. The spray soaked through his layers, turning his movements sluggish, yet he did not retreat. He simply watched the abyss, waiting for the water to dictate the next impossible turn. The sound of the sea shifted. It was no longer a rhythmic pulse, but a discordant roar, drowned out by the sudden, sharp cacophony of human voices behind him. Thousands of people surged forward, a mass of movement that pushed the air out of the clearing. Moses did not turn. He heard the scramble of feet on loose shale, the frantic rhythm of people stumbling over their own desperation. A woman screamed, a high, thin sound that pierced the spray and salt. Then came the chorus of voices, a wall of sound thick with terror. They were pressing into the narrow strip of land, their bodies shoving against one another, driven by the instinct to escape. Some clawed at the sand, their hands digging deep, while others stood motionless, staring at the churning abyss with hollow, wide eyes. The air grew heavy with the smell of sweat and damp earth. A man broke from the front of the line, his arms outstretched as if to touch the waves, but he stopped short, his body trembling as the dark water lashed at his toes. He fell back into the surging crowd, his face twisted in a silent plea. There was no order, only the crushing weight of panic that rippled through the thousands, a singular, frantic pulse that vibrated in the very ground beneath their feet. The panic did not stop, but it changed. A low, rhythmic tremor began to vibrate through the ground, fighting for dominance against the crashing surf. It was a sound that did not belong to the wind or the tide. Moses felt the earth pulse beneath his soles, a deep, percussive beat that grew sharper with every passing second. He tilted his head, his focus shifting from the white froth of the sea to the dark, distant ridge behind the encampment. The sound of thousands of voices began to fray, then died into a jagged, suffocating silence. Even the children stopped their weeping. The thud of horses became a steady, relentless cadence, like the heartbeat of an approaching storm. It was the synchronized, heavy gallop of chariots. The dust began to rise in a thin, dark line along the horizon, obscuring the path they had just traveled. The trap had snapped shut. Moses looked back at the crowd. They were no longer moving, frozen in a collective, hollow realization. The rhythmic drumming of the hooves increased, faster now, a lethal tempo that echoed against the canyon walls. The sea remained a wall of violence in front, and now, the iron-shod wheels of the enemy carved the earth behind them. There was no more space to run. The horizon was black with the encroaching force, and the gap between life and total destruction was narrowing with every thunderous step. Moses pulled his gaze from the horizon. The thunder of the approaching army remained a constant, vibrating weight in the air, but he turned his back on it. He reached out and gripped his wooden staff. It was rough, worn smooth by years of travel, and felt cold against his palm. He lifted it slightly, gauging the balance, feeling the density of the grain. To any other eye, it was merely a branch, salvaged from the scrub, but in his grip, it held a different resonance. He ran his thumb over a deep knot in the wood, a small, jagged imperfection that bit into his skin. He planted the base of the staff firmly into the wet, yielding sand. It sank an inch, then two, meeting the resistance of the harder earth beneath the surface. He adjusted his stance, spreading his feet to lock his weight against the wind that whipped off the sea. The staff stood straight, a dark, motionless line against the churning gray water. He tightened his fingers around the top, his knuckles white, his posture shifting from that of a weary traveler to a man bracing for an impact. The wood didn't tremble. It was a solid, singular point of stillness in a world that had suddenly become defined by movement, chaos, and the crushing proximity of the end. The rhythm of the approaching army escalated, transforming from a distant drumbeat into a deafening metallic roar. The ground beneath Moses shuddered, the vibration traveling up through the staff and into his arms, a relentless, percussive warning that shook the very air. To the rear, the horizon vanished, consumed by a churning, dark brown wall of dust. It billowed forward, propelled by the speed of hundreds of horses, blotting out the light of the afternoon sun. The air thickened, turning gritty and dry, coating the tongue with the taste of pulverized earth. Moses heard the sharp, high-pitched screech of iron wheels grinding against stone, a sound that sliced through the deeper thunder of hooves. The crowd behind him broke. The collective panic surged forward, a wave of human bodies desperate to find safety where none existed. People fell, scrambled, and clawed at the sand, their cries now thin and fragile against the overwhelming mechanical noise. The wall of dust reached the perimeter of the encampment, swirling in violent, erratic gusts that stung the skin. Moses remained motionless, his eyes narrowed against the grit, watching as the shadows of the lead chariots flickered through the haze. The threat was no longer a distant possibility. It was a physical weight pressing against the back of his neck, cold and absolute. The roar of the pursuing host was now a physical presence, a wall of sound so dense it seemed to displace the air. Moses did not look back. He closed his eyes, sealing out the sight of the dust clouds and the shifting, terrified masses behind him. In the sudden darkness of his own mind, he searched for the center of his own intent. He drew a long, ragged breath, holding it until his lungs burned, then released it in a measured, steady stream. He focused on the sensation of the sand beneath his feet, the way the grain shifted and settled under his weight, grounding him against the tremors of the earth. He slowed his heartbeat, forcing the frantic rhythm of the crowd to fade into a dull, rhythmic thud against his own calm. The tension in his shoulders, which had been coiled like a spring, began to dissipate, replaced by a cold, heavy density of purpose. He felt the sweat cooling on his skin, the bite of the wind, and the relentless, driving pressure of the danger at his back. Yet, within the core of his chest, a strange, iron stillness took hold. He was no longer reacting to the noise. He was waiting for the moment to move. He stood perfectly, unnervingly still, a solitary pillar of silence amidst the encroaching storm. Moses opened his eyes. The world remained loud, but his focus had narrowed to the space directly before him. He took a heavy, deliberate step forward, his feet sinking into the transition zone where the dry dunes met the wet, packed sand of the shoreline. The sea churned with a rhythm that felt disconnected from the tide, a restless, slapping motion that sprayed salt into the air. He reached out, his fingers wrapping firmly around the grain of the wood. With a steady, calculated exertion, he drove the base of the staff downward. It pierced the surface, sinking deep into the saturated, dark earth, until it held firm against the shifting resistance of the ground. He leaned his weight into the wood, testing the stability of the hold. A gust of wind whipped across the beach, tugging at his frame, but the staff acted as a lever, locking him into place. He did not sway. He did not yield. The wood vibrated under his palm, absorbing the energy of his grip. He checked the depth once more, pressing his palm into the top of the staff to ensure it was immovable. The ground held. He was anchored. The wind intensified, whistling through the gaps in the nearby dunes, but he remained braced, a single point of resistance against the encroaching chaos. The sky above the shoreline began to bruise. What had been a standard overcast layer curdled into thick, charcoal-colored masses that churned with a slow, circular intensity. The light failed, not gradually, but in sudden, uneven patches as the clouds knit themselves into a low-hanging ceiling. A heavy, metallic scent hung in the air, thick enough to coat the throat. Moses watched the horizon as the clouds mirrored the agitation of the people behind him. The crowd had gone quiet, their collective shouting replaced by a jagged, sharp-edged tension. Every individual stood frozen, eyes drawn upward toward the roiling black expanse. The wind began to swirl in erratic pockets, kicking up small cyclones of sand that skittered across the beach. The air pressure dropped, a sudden vacuum that made the ears pop and the lungs struggle to find a rhythm. Thunder did not roll. It cracked, a sharp, whip-like sound that reverberated off the surface of the water. The sea responded, its waves flattening under the weight of the air, turning into a dark, oily expanse that slapped against the shore with increased force. The sky was now a solid, swirling weight, pressing down on the narrow strip of land where the people were trapped. There was no room left for doubt. The storm had arrived. The sound arrived from the distance, a low, rhythmic thrumming that vibrated through the soles of his feet. It was the synchronized beat of wheels biting into the desert floor. Moses did not turn his head. He kept his eyes locked on the horizon, where the dark water met the darker sky. He shifted his stance, widening his base to distribute his weight against the increasing gale. His right hand moved to the top of the wood, fingers curling over the grain. He tightened his hold until the muscles in his forearm corded with strain. He pushed down, the wood digging further into the wet sand, turning his knuckles white against the dark surface of the staff. The thrumming grew louder, a mechanical heartbeat of iron and wood drawing closer to the shoreline. He felt the vibration travel up the staff and into his bones, a constant, rattling reminder of the time slipping away. His breath remained slow, measured, and deliberate. He did not blink. Every fiber of his being focused on that thin, distant line where the sky met the sea. He increased the pressure of his grip, his hand becoming a rigid lock on the wood. He was the only barrier between the surging tide and the path he had yet to carve. The horizon remained empty, but he did not waver. The thrumming of the chariots reached a fever pitch, a roar that threatened to drown out the sound of the surf. Moses moved. He pulled the staff upward, the wood resisting as the mud clung to its base. A wet, tearing sound echoed as it broke free from the sand. He did not hesitate. He pivoted on his heel, his entire frame aligning with the dark, heavy clouds that hung overhead. He drew his arm back, gathering the strength of his shoulders, and thrust the staff upward. The movement was sharp, precise, and absolute. He extended his arm to its full reach, pointing the tip directly into the center of the churning vortex. He held it there, his muscles locked in a rigid, unwavering line. His feet remained planted, heels dug deep into the wet ground to anchor his weight against the force of the wind. He stood as a pillar, his body a bridge between the earth he stood upon and the heavens he challenged. Below, the sea continued to hammer the shore, but he ignored the spray. His focus remained fixed on the sky. He held the staff aloft, a singular, defiant line against the darkening horizon, waiting for the command to be heard. The air grew still, the roar of the chariots fading into the background as he stood, arm extended, challenging the very atmosphere to respond. The sky above did not fade to gray. It ruptured. A single point of intensity formed at the zenith, centered directly over the tip of the staff. The clouds, previously a thick, suffocating blanket, began to swirl in a tight, violent orbit around that center. Moses did not look away. He felt the air pressure plummet, a sudden vacuum that pulled the breath from his lungs and made the skin on his arms crawl. Then, the breach occurred. A shaft of golden light, thick as an oak trunk, slammed downward from the heights. It did not diffuse. It cut through the gloom like a solid blade. The light hit the staff first, traveling down the length of the wood and into his hand. His skin glowed with a harsh, metallic sheen. The sand at his feet turned from dark brown to a brilliant, reflective white under the sudden exposure. He stood illuminated in a pillar of sheer, blinding radiance that defied the surrounding storm. The shadow cast by his own body stretched long and sharp across the wet shoreline, pinned to the earth by the weight of the light. He remained anchored, his grip unwavering, as the brilliance intensified, turning the dark, swirling clouds into a gilded, rotating crown above his head. The radiance was absolute, consuming the horizon and erasing the boundaries between the sea and the sky. The beam of golden light struck the water precisely where the staff aimed. It did not splash, it penetrated. Where the light touched the surface, the churning waves instantly flattened into a mirror-like sheen. A low, subterranean hum began to resonate through the ground, vibrating upward through the soles of his feet. Moses felt the frequency in his teeth. The water around the impact point stopped its horizontal motion, gathering into a dense, swirling mass that spiraled downward with impossible speed. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and wet salt, a sharp, metallic tang that burned the back of his throat. Beneath the surface, something massive shifted. The seabed groaned under the pressure of the concentrated energy. The hum grew louder, a deep, guttural throb that synchronized with the beating of his own heart. The surface of the sea began to ripple in perfect, concentric circles that defied the chaotic winds. Every drop of water within the reach of the light seemed to be held in place, suspended by an unseen force. The water turned translucent, revealing a dark, roiling depth that pulsed with a rhythm of its own. The calm was brief, a silent warning before the inevitable, as the energy coiled tighter, pulling the very tides into a singular, pressurized point of resistance. The hum reached a pitch that shattered the air. It was no longer a sound, it was a physical blow. The sea did not merely move, it recoiled. Beneath the golden pillar, the seabed fractured with a sound like a mountain splitting in two. A massive, concussive force erupted from the depths, throwing millions of tons of water upward in a singular, violent heave. The ocean groaned, a deep, primal sound that drowned out the wind and the distant cries of the crowd. White foam exploded outward, catching the golden light and turning into a blinding mist that obscured the horizon. Moses planted his feet, leaning his weight against the shockwave that surged toward the shore. The pressure was absolute. Water, once a fluid, became a wall of solid, rushing resistance. It tore away from the center, pushed by an invisible hand that carved through the deep. The roar intensified, growing from a rumble to a deafening, sustained thunder that vibrated through the very bedrock beneath his feet. The water rose, swirling and churning, captured in a violent, upward trajectory. Every drop was forced into motion, a frantic, chaotic dance of liquid energy that refused to remain contained. The seabed lay exposed for a fraction of a second, raw and dark, before the water surged higher, beginning its climb into the sky. The chaos of the initial eruption halted. The millions of tons of churning water stopped their erratic flight and began to bend. To the left and right, the ocean curved inward, rising with a deliberate, terrifying geometry. The water turned a deep, translucent sapphire, catching the light in a way that made the liquid appear solid. It climbed into the sky, higher than any tree, higher than any cliff. These were not waves, they were vertical plains of brine, liquid skyscrapers that stood motionless against the horizon. The sound of the roar shifted from a chaotic crash to a rhythmic, steady pulse, as if the ocean itself were breathing. Moses watched as the walls continued to climb, their edges serrated with frozen droplets that defied gravity. The surface of the walls shimmered, smooth and glass-like, reflecting the golden light in long, distorted ribbons of blue. They stretched outward, flanking the center with an imposing, immovable weight. The spray that had filled the air fell away, leaving the atmosphere clear and unnervingly still. The sheer scale of the walls blocked the light from the sides, casting a deep, cool shadow across the center of the beach. The ocean had been reshaped into a canyon of water, a monumental corridor defined by the immense sapphire heights that loomed over the earth, held in place by an invisible, absolute grip. Between the towering liquid banks, the floor of the sea emerged. It was not the mud-slicked, weed-choked bottom one might expect, but a vast expanse of hard-packed sand and pulverized shell. Water drained from the surface in 1,000 tiny rivulets, vanishing into the cracks as if the earth itself were thirsty. The seabed was dry. It felt solid beneath the pressure of the atmosphere, a firm bridge forged from the abyss. The ground shimmered with a pale golden light, reflecting the radiance of the sky above. It was perfectly clear, stretching forward like a highway carved through the heart of the deep. Moses took a step. The sand did not shift. It held his weight with the stability of stone. Every grain of silt seemed to vibrate with the lingering energy of the parting. There were no pools of standing water, no treacherous sinkholes, only a pristine, golden corridor that vanished into the distance. It looked as if the ocean had never been there at all, leaving behind a sterile, silent path. The transition was absolute. Where the churning tide had once defied movement, Now there was only the inviting, shimmering expanse of the dry floor. He looked ahead at the path, a golden vein running through the dark, and waited for the silence to be broken by the steps of the people behind him. The people halted at the threshold of the path, their eyes drawn upward to the living masonry flanking their way. Within the towering walls of sapphire, the ocean had not simply vanished. It had been held captive. Schools of silverfish darted through the translucent depths, their scales flashing like needles of light against the dark blue. They swam in frantic, repetitive circles, bumping against the invisible barrier that now served as a wall. Larger shapes drifted in the periphery, shadows of creatures that had never before felt the touch of the sun. A massive ray, its wingspan wide as a tent, pressed its pale underside against the liquid surface. Hovering inches from the line of sight of those walking below, it remained frozen in place, a silent sentinel suspended in the brine. Small bioluminescent jellies pulsed with a rhythmic, soft glow, drifting aimlessly through the compressed currents. They lacked the panic of the fish, floating with a strange, hypnotic grace. The people walked slowly, necks craned, watching as the inhabitants of the deep pressed their eyes to the wall. It was a gallery of the abyss. For a heartbeat, the motion of the crowd stopped. A great shark, teeth bared in a permanent, predatory grin, glided down the length of the wall, its obsidian eye tracking the movement of a child. The world of the surface and the world of the depths watched each other, separated by a thin, shimmering membrane of absolute force. Moses stood at the very lip of the dry seabed, his boots resting on the edge of where the tide had retreated. He took a single, deliberate breath, drawing in the air. It did not smell of salt or brine. Instead, it carried the heavy, rich scent of deep, sun-baked earth, an odor that had been buried beneath the ocean for ages. He leaned forward, shifting his weight onto the front foot, preparing to commit to the path. Without warning, the air around him fractured. A sudden supernatural gust erupted from the void, tearing across the seabed with the force of a gale. It hammered against him, snapping the fabric of his heavy outer garment in violent, rhythmic cracks. The wind was not a natural breeze. It felt dense, almost liquid, vibrating with a low-frequency hum that rattled his teeth. He braced his legs, driving his heels into the firm sand to keep from stumbling. The wind whipped around the vertical walls of water, creating a localized vortex that sent spray and sediment spiraling into the sky. He did not flinch. He adjusted his stance, leaned into the invisible pressure, and pushed off. His forward momentum cut through the resistance of the air. He stepped fully onto the seabed, leaving the shoreline behind. His presence, the singular point of movement in a world held in absolute, trembling suspension. Moses stopped 10 paces into the seabed and turned. Behind him, the people remained anchored to the shore, their faces pale, eyes wide as they stared at the towering liquid walls. They were caught in a trance of disbelief, unable to reconcile the sight of the dry path with the looming threat of the Egyptian chariots. In the distance, the rhythmic thud of horses and the metallic clatter of armor began to vibrate through the ground. The sound grew, a low roar that signaled the end of their time. Moses raised his right hand, fingers splayed, and held it steady against the chaotic backdrop of the swirling clouds. He did not shout. He simply held the gesture, a sharp, unyielding line against the sky. The signal cut through the air, piercing the collective stupor of the thousands huddled at the bank. A ripple of movement started at the front of the line. A woman dropped her load and stumbled forward. A man surged past her, his feet hitting the dry sand with a frantic, echoing slap. The hesitation shattered. The crowd erupted into a desperate, surging wave of humanity. They poured off the shore, boots kicking up puffs of dust, their lungs burning as they lunged into the canyon of water. The path of sand, silent seconds ago, now roared with the sound of thousands of people fleeing for their lives. The exodus had begun. Thousands of people flooded the dry seabed, a chaotic river of bodies pressing forward against the silence of the deep. Footsteps hammered the ground, a frantic percussion that echoed up into the towering sapphire walls. Children clutched at the hands of their parents, their eyes darting upward at the translucent, swirling currents held back by an invisible force. The path was narrow, confining the mass of people into a tight, relentless stream. Every few seconds, someone would stumble, only to be hauled upright by the momentum of those behind them. The air between the water walls was cold, damp, and smelled of ancient silt and crushed stone. It felt heavy, pressing against their skin like a physical weight. Panic remained a sharp, jagged edge in their movement, yet the sheer necessity of survival drove them onward. They did not look back. They kept their focus on the sliver of light at the far end of the canyon. The sound of their breathing became a collective rasp, rhythmic and strained, syncing with the frantic pace of their feet. They moved as one, a singular, desperate organism tunneling through the heart of the ocean. Each step was a gamble against the stability of the walls, a race against the inevitable moment when the sea would reclaim its own. The last of the people clawed their way up the far bank, their breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. A woman collapsed, her hands clawing at the dry earth as she crawled to safety. Behind her, the path was finally empty. A long, winding scar of dry sand carved through the dark abyss. Then, the sound changed. The rhythmic clatter of wood and iron reached the original shoreline, amplified by the vast, open space. A massive vanguard of chariots rounded the dune, their speed unchecked until the very edge of the water. The lead horses saw the sudden, vertical wall of sapphire liquid rising miles into the sky. They shrieked, their front hooves tearing at the sand as they reared back in raw, animal terror. The driver hauled on the reins, his weight thrown backward, but the momentum dragged the heavy frame forward. Behind him, the entire line of the army slammed to a halt, chariot wheels locked, skidding in the sand with a piercing, metallic screech that echoed off the towering water. The air grew thick with the scent of sweat and hot metal. The soldiers fell silent, their weapons lowered, as they stared into the heart of the miracle. The path stood open, inviting, yet blocked by an invisible, terrifying boundary. Every horse was trembling, nostrils flaring as they scented the salt, and the deep, unnatural chill radiating from the wall of water. The shock held the line for only a few seconds. The soldiers stood frozen, eyes wide as they surveyed the impossible corridor of sand. Then, a commander shouted. The sound cut through the heavy air, sharp and demanding. He lashed his whip, the leather cracking like a gunshot against the silence of the seabed. One by one, the horses responded to the sting. They surged forward, hooves digging into the damp earth with newfound, desperate purpose. The heavy wooden wheels began to turn. They hit the exposed seabed with a rhythmic, thunderous clatter, grinding against ancient stones and shells long hidden by the deep. The sound amplified, bouncing off the towering walls of sapphire water that loomed on either side. Dust and sea salt kicked up in swirling plumes as the chariots gathered speed. The iron rims struck the flat, calcified ground, creating a chaotic, metallic roar that drowned out the distant crashing of the sea. There was no room for caution now. The army committed to the path, a river of bronze and wood flowing into the heart of the abyss. Every driver leaned forward, eyes locked on the trail ahead, ignoring the wet, shifting walls that threatened to collapse with every passing second. They were moving at full gallop, the weight of their pursuit shaking the very foundations of the dry sea floor. Moses stood on the solid, sun-baked earth of the far bank, his feet planted wide. He did not look back. The ground beneath him vibrated with the rhythmic, heavy thud of iron wheels and the frantic pounding of hundreds of hooves. The noise was a storm of grinding metal and desperate, guttural shouts, closing the distance with every breath he took. He felt the spray of salt mist against his skin, carried on the wind that whipped through the narrow corridor. He remained motionless, a single point of stillness amidst the unfolding catastrophe. As the first rays of the morning sun began to bleed over the jagged desert horizon, he turned slowly. His gaze bypassed the approaching wall of bronze and wood, locking onto the exact line where the brilliant light met the dark, churning surface of the sea. There was no hesitation in his stance. The roar of the chariots reached a fever pitch, the air thick with the smell of horse sweat and hot sand. He kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, his breathing measured and deep. The weight of his task centered in his chest, a quiet pressure that eclipsed the violence of the world behind him. He waited for the precise alignment of light and shadow, his focus absolute as the chaos reached its peak. The earth shuddered under the relentless onslaught of the approaching chariots. The roar of the pursuit was no longer a distant threat. It was a physical pressure against his back, a cacophony of metallic clatter and desperate screams. Moses gripped the wood of his staff. His knuckles were white, the grain of the wood pressing deep into his palms. He felt the immense power contained within the artifact, a hum that vibrated through his arms and into his very marrow. It was a heavy, living weight, tethering the towering sapphire walls to the world of men. He took a slow, steady breath. The air around him grew sharp with the scent of ozone and brine. He looked down at the sand, then back at the horizon where the light was blinding. The moment of necessity had arrived. His fingers loosened. He did not throw the wood away. He simply let go. The staff slipped from his grasp, gravity claiming it in an instant. It struck the dry seabed with a solid, final thud. The connection snapped. The hum in his hands vanished, leaving behind a sudden, ringing silence that hung in the air for a fraction of a heartbeat before the world began to move again. The impact of the staff against the seabed echoed like a thunderclap across the narrow passage. For a terrifying second, the towering sapphire walls remained frozen, defying the laws of nature. Then, the sound began. It started as a low, deep-seated vibration that rattled the very teeth of those standing on the bank. The water, once smooth and crystalline, began to ripple and fracture. Massive fissures appeared in the liquid surfaces, spider-webbing upward from the base. The walls groaned, a mournful, heavy sound of shifting weight that drowned out the frantic cries of the pursuers below. The sapphire columns shivered, their structural integrity failing as the divine commands ceased to hold them in place. The translucent towers began to lean, tilting slowly toward the center of the path. The air pressure shifted, creating a sudden, violent draft that pulled at everything in its reach. The water did not just fall, it surrendered to gravity with the force of 1,000 mountains colliding at once. The massive structures buckled, bowing inward as the top edges curved down, preparing to reclaim the space they had occupied for the long journey. The sky seemed to tilt as the horizon vanished behind the wall of shifting, crashing liquid, signaling the end of the path. The collision was absolute. Millions of tons of water slammed into the seabed with the force of a tectonic shift. The sapphire towers shattered upon impact, disintegrating into a violent, churning mass of white foam. This wall of spray exploded outward, a blinding, chaotic tide that raced across the floor of the sea. It swallowed the path in a single, breathtaking rush. There was no resistance, no hesitation. The foam surged forward, a churning white blanket that erased the dry ground and everything that had dared to tread upon it. The sound was deafening, a roar of liquid fury that drowned out the world. Every inch of the passage was reclaimed. The deep silence of the ocean floor was replaced by the chaotic hiss of receding spray and the heavy, rhythmic thrum of returning currents. The path was gone. Where there had been a way through, there was now only the unrelenting weight of the sea. The water surged and boiled, leveling itself out as the surface smoothed into a seamless, dark expanse. The sea had returned to its original state, sealing the grave of the pursuit beneath a thick, impenetrable layer of foam and salt. The path was sealed forever. The violent roar that had defined the last moments began to lose its sharp, jagged edge. The water, once a chaotic, roiling mass, started to breathe. It rose and fell in a slow, heavy rhythm against the newly formed shoreline. Each wave hit the sand with a dull, thudding weight, lacking the fury of the initial collapse. The spray, which had hung in the air like a thick, blinding veil, slowly drifted away on the rising breeze. Visibility returned, but the view was stripped of everything that had been there only minutes before. The churning currents smoothed out, the white foam dissipating into thin, translucent sheets that retreated back into the deep. A steady, rhythmic pulsing took hold of the sea, a heartbeat of water moving against the land. The intensity of the event receded, leaving behind a hollow, expansive quiet. The wind picked up, whistling across the vast, dark surface of the water, carrying the sharp scent of salt and damp earth. It pushed against the shore, steady and relentless. The chaotic thrashing was gone, replaced by the simple, mournful sound of the tide reclaiming its domain. The sea was whole again, indifferent to the turbulence it had just contained. Thousands of pairs of eyes remained fixed on the horizon, unblinking. Nobody spoke. The air was thick with the remnants of sea spray, yet no one reached out to wipe it away. They stood where the sand met the dry, hard ground, their feet planted deep as if fearing the earth itself might dissolve beneath them. The silence was not empty. It was heavy, pressing down on every person present. They looked back at the vast, dark expanse of the water, a flat surface that gave no hint of the violence it had just contained. Shoulders slumped as the adrenaline began to drain away, leaving a hollow, tremulous exhaustion in its wake. A collective, ragged intake of breath rippled through the crowd, the first sound of life returning to the bank. They stood as if carved from stone, witnesses to an impossibility that had rewritten the laws of the world in a matter of heartbeats. Every gaze remained locked on the water, searching the shifting currents for a trace of what had been, or perhaps for a sign of what lay ahead. There was no celebration, only the profound, jarring weight of having crossed a threshold from which there was no return. They were anchored to the spot, held by the sheer gravity of their own survival. Moses stood at the very edge of the water, his boots caked in a thick layer of damp sand. He did not look back at the people. He did not look at the expanse of the sea. His hands hung loosely at his sides, fingers curled inward, still holding the phantom shape of the staff he had surrendered to the earth. The muscles in his jaw were tight, locked in place, and his gaze remained fixed on a single point in the sand. He took a slow, heavy breath, the kind that forces the chest to expand against a crushing weight. His shoulders dropped, then rose again, a rhythmic movement that betrayed a profound, physical fatigue. He shifted his weight, his heels sinking deeper into the soft ground. Every movement was deliberate, stripped of urgency, as if the air around him had grown dense and difficult to push through. He turned his head slightly, his eyes tracing the line where the water met the dunes. The lines around his mouth were etched deep, mapping out the toll of the last few hours. He did not linger on the side of the sea. He drew a final, ragged breath, let his chin dip toward his chest, and slowly pivoted his body away from the water. He was a man who had reached the end of a long, narrow road. He took his first step toward the east. The sand beneath his feet was firm, cooling as the night air began to retreat. He did not look back. His pace was slow, measured, and rhythmic, each stride carrying him further from the banks of the sea. Behind him, the people began to stir. A murmur rose from the crowd, not of voices, but of movement, the shuffle of thousands of feet finding the path. The horizon began to pale. A thin, sharp line of amber bled into the gray, then widened, pushing the shadows back toward the west. As the first rays of the sun crested the desert floor, the light caught the dust in the air, turning it into a shimmering, golden haze. The warmth arrived suddenly, hitting the back of his neck, then spreading over the group behind him. Eyes that had been wide with terror squinted against the sudden brilliance. Heads lifted, shoulders straightened as the harsh, golden light washed over the landscape, erasing the long, jagged shadows of the night. Moses kept his gaze fixed ahead. He stepped forward, and the people followed, their figures becoming silhouettes against the growing brightness of the morning. The path forward was clear, and the light promised no return. The rhythm of thousands of footsteps began to soften as the terrain shifted from hard-packed silt to shifting dunes. Moses crested the first ridge, his boots sinking into the loose, sun-warmed sand. He paused for a heartbeat, his silhouette stark against the deepening blue of the morning sky. Behind him, the collective sound of the people, the low rumble of voices, the clatter of gear, the uneven tread of many feet tapered off into the vastness. The wind picked up, a dry, steady gust that erased their tracks as soon as they were made. Moses resumed his walk, his pace steady, neither quickening nor slowing. He moved toward a point where the horizon blurred into the shimmering heat. Slowly, the group trailed out behind him, a long, thin line that seemed to dissolve into the undulating landscape. The desert was immense, a sea of sand that swallowed the movement of the crowd until they were nothing more than specks of dust suspended in the light. The sound of their passage vanished, absorbed by the expanse of rock and dune. There was no echo. There was no trail left behind. Only the silence of the desert remained, expanding to fill the space they had occupied, stretching out toward an open, limitless future.